And there he is right now, the House Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries. Mr. Leader, great to see you on the program. Thanks for doing this.
Jim, great to see you. Thanks for having me on.
The eagle has landed, as I sometimes say. This is a new toy that we're playing with these days, the Substack machine, as I call it. And I understand this is your first time doing a live show on Substack, so welcome.
This is my maiden voyage on Substack, and I can't think of a better person, better captain to be on the ship with than you.
Well, I'll try to keep us away from any icebergs here, but thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it. And, one of the things I was talking about with Pete Buttigieg just a little while ago, I'll ask you the same thing. It seems as though Democrats have said, it's important to get on some of these other platforms, important to talk to independent media. There are lots of other folks out there that aren't watching traditional news media, aren't watching corporate media anymore, and they're getting their news, getting their information from places like this.
That's absolutely correct. I think one of the lessons that emerged from the 2024 campaign is that we have legacy media, and that still has a role to play. Certainly for us in Congress, where we represent individual districts across the country, we have local media, local radio, local print, local TV. That continues to be incredibly important for all of our members across the country. But then we have this new media landscape where so many Americans get their news and their information about politics, about lifestyle, about culture, about music, about sports. And we've got to be present in every single corner of the new media landscape.
Yeah, and Leader Jeffries, it's great to see you on Substack. I'm sure folks are going to be following you, and they're going to want you to start doing your shows. You're going to get so hooked on this that your staffers are going to say, "Leader Jeffries, we have a vote to get to. Come on, sir," and you're going to have so much fun here. But in all seriousness, let's get to some news because I have to ask you about what's happening with Signalgate. I know you called for the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, to resign. You sent a letter to Donald Trump demanding that take place. Have you heard back from the White House?
We have not heard back directly from President Trump. The White House spokesperson issued what effectively was a milquetoast non-answer. They clearly are running scared, and this is not something that's going to go away. First of all, Pete Hegseth should have never been confirmed as the Secretary of the Department of Defense. He's the most unqualified defense secretary ever. Mitch McConnell knew it, which is why he voted against Hegseth. Susan Collins knew it. That's why she voted against Hegseth. Lisa Murkowski knew it, and every single Democrat in the Senate, and we've been very clear in the House. And now the chickens have come home to roost because we see this combination of both arrogance and incompetence, and it's a toxic combination, and American lives were jeopardized as a result.
And members of your caucus were asking some very tough questions, led by the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Jim Himes, basically asking the question, how in the hell can you let something like this happen? And it just speaks of kind of amateur hour over there at the White House. But at the same time, you have to wonder whether laws were broken. I mean, people have been prosecuted for less than this. I used to cover the Trump campaign back in 2016 when they would say, lock her up about Hillary Clinton's emails. This goes way beyond emails.
That's correct. Several laws are likely to have been broken, including the Espionage Act. It's something that congressional Democrats are looking into, led by Jim Himes and others like Jamie Raskin. And we'll continue that pursuit. We're going to follow the facts. We're going to apply the law, be guided by the Constitution, and make sure that there are some consequences here and that people are held accountable. Yesterday, several Democrats gathered to talk to the nation, led by our military veterans, people like Jason Crow, who is just a phenomenal patriot, Mikey Sherrill, and many, many others, Pat Ryan from New York, and they were all very clear that if any service member, man or woman in uniform, were to have done this, they would be court-martialed or not simply put in jail, buried underneath the jail. This is how serious an offense this was. And you've got the White House disinformation machine trying to sweep it under the rug. It's all very extraordinary. These were the nation's top national security professionals.
Yeah.
And it was a malignant clown show. Malignant because it was very dangerous to the safety and security of our servicemen and women and the American people.
Yeah, I mean, one of the astounding details is Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Special Envoy, apparently was in Russia meeting with Putin when some of these details were going back in this text thread. And I was talking to Pete Buttigieg about this. I remember when I went to China, they took our phones and our laptops away and gave us burner phones and laptops because they were so worried about the Chinese getting into our devices. One has to think that the Russians at least attempted to get into their devices. And it makes you wonder what was going. I suppose you need an investigation into that to get to the bottom of that.
That's correct. When we
Yeah.
enter into the airspace of an adversary, or in some cases, even a friendlier competitor, where you know that these foreign entities have significant intelligence and surveillance capacities, we don't even travel abroad without with our phones,
Yeah.
official phones or personal phones in particular. And so it is quite extraordinary that Witkoff apparently was in Russia, and I think Tulsi Gabbard was somewhere in Southeast Asia, where you can be almost certain that China was watching
Hmm.
and listening
Wow.
to try to figure out what was going on in terms of her activity. And so the security breach was significant. As many of my colleagues have said, heads have to roll, but in my view, it's got to start with the Secretary of Defense. He's got to resign or he should be fired by
Yeah.
President Trump. And that's why I sent him that letter yesterday.
I mean, I can only think, Leader Jeffries, if you had done that, I know sometimes you're brought into sensitive intelligence matters, what they would try to do with Hakeem Jeffries.
Well, that's absolutely correct. I can only
Yeah.
imagine Fox News would be in a feeding frenzy right now,
Yes, they
and
would.
so would the right wing media disinformation ecosystem. But facts don't matter often for many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Hypocrisy is not a constraint to their behavior. They'll say one thing and do another, and they actually believe, Jim, that
Mm.
shamelessness is a superpower, and we see it on full display. But we're not going to let them get away with this situation right now. We can't, because this is a matter of urgent national security. One thing I'd mention, Jim, because
Yeah.
when I transitioned from House Democratic caucus chair to House Democratic leader, I became a part of what you know to be the Gang of Eight, the
Right.
four legislative leaders in the House and in the Senate, and the four leaders of the Intelligence Committee.
Correct.
And we actually have the opportunity to hear directly from our national security professionals with respect to a lot of highly classified and sensitive information, always in a secure location.
Right.
Never are we allowed to even bring our phones in to that secure location, let alone have conversations outside of that secure location on our phones
Yeah.
using non-military grade encryption chat platforms like Signal.
Right, exactly. And I do want to ask you about some other things because you mentioned your status in the Gang of Eight. That brings up, the question about how Democrats are just in the minority by a couple of votes. You have this election coming up next week for the Wisconsin Supreme Court, that open seat there. It's been reported that that race could determine who controls Congress because of redistricting battles and so on that happen in these various states. Apparently, they've had this take place in Wisconsin too. Elon Musk has dumped $17 million into that race for that open seat. How important is that election, and could it possibly make you the speaker?
Well, it's an extraordinarily important election just on the merits because
Yeah.
a billionaire puppet master like Elon Musk, who's unelected, unaccountable, unpopular, and unhinged, should not be able to buy our democracy. And he clearly is trying to do just that in this particular instance, just dumping $17 million, it appears, into the Wisconsin State Supreme Court race. Likely will be more once we get to Tuesday of next week. And here's the thing: Republicans have continued to use the redistricting process and extreme partisan gerrymandering to artificially give them a political advantage. As you mentioned, Jim, we are just 3 seats short
3 seats.
of a majority here in the Congress. 3 seats short when we're at full strength. And so at full strength, the Republicans are at 220. At full strength, we're at 215. 218, of course, is a majority when some of these vacancies are filled. In North Carolina, they did an extraordinary thing in the last Congress. Mid-decade redistricting. Redistricting had already been done, and it resulted in a delegation of 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans in North Carolina. That makes
Yeah.
sense because it's a 50-50 state. Democratic governor for the last several years, including the one recently elected. Donald Trump won the state of North Carolina. It's a 50-50 state. It had a
Yeah.
50-50 congressional delegation until Republicans engaged in mid-decade extreme partisan gerrymandering. They took 3 seats away from Democrats that were competitive seats that we held. They made them safe Republican seats. And now the congressional delegation in North Carolina is 10 Republicans, 4 Democrats.
Wow.
That right there makes up the difference in terms of who is in the majority and who's not. And so the
Yeah.
lesson that they've learned from that is that the American people didn't even put them in the majority. North Carolina extreme partisan gerrymandering
Hmm.
by the legislature did. And so
Interesting.
that's why these races are going to continue to be important because what we want are fair lines all across the country. And in order to ensure that we get fair lines, we have to have an enlightened state Supreme Court.
And I have to ask you, we brought up Elon Musk. I mean, one of the things that's been taking place, obviously, since Donald Trump came into office, is the way he and his team have just gone through, various agencies and departments of the federal government, like a bull in a china shop. They're laying off workers, they're laying off veterans, they're cutting staff at the Social Security Administration, and that administration has been getting a lot of attention, as you know, over the last week or so, with office closures, cutbacks, of new phone service rules, new rules requiring in-person visits. And DOGE is making some of these charges and these changes without consulting or notifying some members of Congress, including members of the Republican Party. I mean, isn't that something that Congress should have a say in before Elon Musk goes and closes down parts of the Social Security Administration? There are so many seniors counting on those checks.
Yes, that's
But
absolutely the
yeah,
case. And it's extraordinary that these extreme MAGA Republicans are going after our parents and our grandparents who rely upon Social Security in order to live, pay their rent, put
yeah,
food on the table, and enjoy these golden years with the grace and dignity that they deserve.
yeah.
And by trying to decimate the Social Security Administration without authorization, which is why Donald Trump and Elon Musk and this DOGE effort, they are being sued over and over and over again, and they're losing in court over and over and
Yeah.
over again, but they're doing damage in real time until they get stopped either in the Congress or in the courts. And the problem that you've highlighted, Jim, is that many Republicans are burying their heads in the sand
Hmm.
and they are yielding our authority as a separate and co-equal branch of government. We're supposed to be a check and balance on an out of control executive branch. We don't work for Donald Trump. There are
Yeah.
no kings, there are no dictators, there are no monarchs in America. We work for the American people, but the Republicans have abdicated that responsibility in the House and in the Senate, and it's a shame. It's one of the reasons why
Yeah.
we believe the American people are going to punish them, and we will take back control of the House of Representatives next year. But until that point in time, we've got to do everything possible to stop the damage that's being done.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, I mean, you mentioned we don't have monarchs. We do seem to have oligarchs. And Elon Musk was able to help Donald Trump win that election, pumping in $290 million. Apparently, he said the other day he wants to put in another $100 billion. He's dumping 17 million into that Wisconsin Supreme Court race. I mean, a lot of people are wondering who's in charge here. It sounds like rich guys like Elon Musk are in charge.
Well, that's correct. I mean, part of
Yeah.
the issue that we see in real time here on Capitol Hill is that House Republicans are arguing with Senate Republicans are arguing with House Republicans, and then they both are trying to figure out that they work for Donald Trump or Elon Musk.
Mm.
And it's chaos, it's confusion, it's corruption, all of which is unfolding in real time.
Yeah.
Elon Musk should have no role, no involvement, no engagement with the government, but he's been unleashed on the American people by Donald Trump
Yeah.
and the
And
Republicans. And they may be afraid of him, afraid of his money. We're not afraid of him. We're not afraid of his money. And we're going to make his effort to buy our democracy an issue in all of these races moving forward.
And what do you think about these rallies that we're starting to see around the country? I mean, I was talking about this with Buttigieg. Democrats were in a little bit of a daze there, between the election and the inauguration, and a little depressed and so on, a little despondent. And then, sort of out of nowhere, and maybe you have some thanks to offer to Elon Musk and Donald Trump and the people at DOGE, because Democrats sort of came out of this slumber and started going to these rallies. They're showing up at protests. Uh, People are pissed off, and they're making that pretty darn clear, to the point where you have the speaker Mike Johnson saying to his conference, "Don't have any town halls." I mean, what are you seeing from the grassroots, at the grassroots level right now?
Well, there's a lot of energy all across the country, and you're correct. In the aftermath of the general election, and I understand it, there was a lot of disappointment all across the country. Kamala Harris did the best job that she could over a 107-day period, ran the strongest race that she could, and fell just short. We lost the Senate, and of course, fell a little short in the House of Representatives. So, people were disappointed all across the country. And then came the inauguration, and then the flood of extremism that occurred immediately thereafter.
Yeah,
And Donald Trump blew any opportunity to have a honeymoon with the American people and have some degree of a normal presidency, because though they lied about Project 2025, throughout the campaign trail, all that we're seeing is Donald Trump unleashing Project 2025 and its extremism on the American people, while at the
yeah,
same time doing nothing to lower the high cost of living in the United States of America. In fact, costs aren't going down, they're going up, because Republicans aren't focused on actually making life better for everyday Americans. We
yeah,
as Democrats, we want to build an economy that works for working class Americans and brings the American dream to life for everyone. The American people aren't seeing that from Republicans. They're seeing them dismantle the American way of life in real time. They don't
yeah.
like it, which is why you're seeing a high degree of energy and righteous indignation all across America.
And I've been kind of calling it a live and let live sort of mentality in the Democratic Party right now. I noticed you were very tolerant of your members during that speech to a joint session of Congress by Donald Trump. You had some members who didn't do any protesting. You had Congressman Green with his cane. You had other members with the paddles, and Congresswoman Stansbury had her little note behind Donald Trump saying this is not normal. There are lots of different perspectives as to how to go about this, and I don't envy your position, because you got a lot of different takes on all of this. What's your take on how the party should fight back?
Well, I think we have to be unified at the congressional level, as we've been
Yeah,
as House Democrats, in pushing back aggressively against their efforts to take a chainsaw to Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and jam this extreme Republican budget down the throats of the American people. Every single House Democrat voted against the House Republican budget resolution at the end of February. We were entirely united because we're trying to defend the health care of the American people. Republicans are trying to visit upon us
yeah,
the largest Medicaid cut in American history, which will be devastating for children and women and families and seniors and people with disabilities. And then you saw House Democrats strongly opposed to the House Republican reckless spending bill that cut health care, cut veterans benefits, and cut nutritional assistance for children and families. Literally, they are ripping food off the table
yeah.
of the American people. It's
And voters
extraordinary.
voters want to know, Democrats want to know, what more can they do? And you're right when you bring up the GOP budget. A lot of concern about what might happen to Medicaid as Trump tries to pay for extending his Trump tax cuts that he got passed the first time around. If you've cut Medicaid by $800 billion or whatever they're talking about, that could just blow a hole in rural hospitals all around the country. I know you represent a district in New York, but I mean, you can have hospitals all across the country affected by this. I suppose urban hospitals too.
That's right. A cut of the magnitude that has been proposed, up to $880 billion, is going to result in hospitals closing
Hmm.
in rural America, in urban America, in small town America, and in the heartland of America. And it's going to result in nursing homes closing. Now, tens of millions of people rely on Medicaid to get their health care, but everybody relies on their local hospital or
Yeah.
nursing home for care for their parents or grandparents. And so everybody has got skin in this game, which is why I think you're seeing explosive energy at Democratic events, town halls, days of action, rallies, and Republicans are running scared. As you pointed out, Jim, they've been directed not to hold town hall meetings. So
Right.
we're showing up and
Yeah.
they're not.
And what do you think? Apparently, Congressman Chris Deluzio, this was in the New York Times, said that the party needs a rebranding. This is what the Times said. A number of frustrated House Democrats who said their party had a weak and undefined brand announced that they were seeking to form a new group to dig out of what they call a crisis, informally referred to as the New Economic Patriots. Does the Democratic Party, in your view, need a rebranding? Needs a tougher image? A little more, grab by the shirt collar type of image. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think as we kind of emerge from the last 4 years and a disappointing presidential election, that it is going to be important for us moving forward to articulate our vision to make life better for the American people and to
Yeah,
regain the narrative on the economy, make it clear that we want to secure our borders, but are also going to defend dreamers, farm workers, and families, and that we want to keep communities safe. And so those are areas where there were clear vulnerabilities in terms of our national brand. Now, Democrats at the local level, which is why so many House Democrats overperformed and were able to win in districts that Trump was winning at the same period of time. We actually grew our numbers from 5 members who represented districts that Donald Trump won in 2020 to now 13 members who represent districts that Donald Trump won in 2024.
yeah.
So at the congressional level, our incumbents are strong and our candidates are strong, and we're well positioned for success next year. But nationally, there's a lot of work to do, and it's all hands on deck. And so, Chris and others, we're going to continue to partner together, and we're going to get this situation turned around.
I'm probably going to get myself in a little trouble. This is why I saved it to the end there. But you saw a lot of comments that folks were not happy with your friend over in the Senate, Chuck Schumer. Have you had a conversation with him to say what? What were your thoughts expressed to him when you saw what he was going through over there? I have to assume that you didn't approve of a lot of those calls for him to step aside. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, he and I had an opportunity to meet the Sunday after the vote in Brooklyn, and we had an open and honest and a candid conversation. And I've also made clear publicly that we're going to work together with Leader Schumer and Senate Democrats moving forward. And we've got to be on the same page. We will be on the same page, particularly as it relates to stopping this reckless Republican budget. And Leader Schumer and I, of course, disagreed on the approach as it related to the government
The
spending
CR, yeah,
showdown. But we agree on the overwhelming majority of things moving forward. And we look forward to our work with Senate Democrats because it is all hands on deck. And we've
yeah.
got to fight them in the Congress. We've got to stop them in the courts, as we've been doing. And we've got to win the hearts and minds of the American people and communities all across the country.
All right, and one last tough question here for you. Who you got in March Madness?
Well, I'm a St. John's fan,
I,
and
I
so
know.
I was
I felt bad for those
heartbroken.
guys.
It was rough, and it was a magical season, and we're already looking forward to next year. But it was heartbreaking and it was disappointing. And there's no Big East team, of course, left in the Sweet 16 under normal circumstances. I would be rooting for UConn or
Yeah.
Villanova or the remaining Big East team. So we're challenged there. I think I'm rooting for Houston
Hmm,
and Kelvin Sampson. Duke's got a great team,
they
and you can
do.
never count out Tom Izzo and Michigan State.
Yeah, very interesting. All right. Well, I knew I had to ask you about that. And I did want to see Patino bring St. John's back into at least the Elite Eight or the Final Four. That would have been cool to watch. We'll see what happens next year. But Leader Jeffries, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I had about 20 more questions to ask, but I did as best as I could to get as many in there. Thank you so much for making time for this. And thanks for jumping into the deep end of the pool of the independent media revolution that's happening in this country right now. I thought it was really great that you guys decided to do this. Really appreciate the time.
Well, thank you. I won't be a stranger. And thanks for all that you do to get the information to the American people.
All right. Thanks, Leader Jeffries. Really appreciate the time. Thanks very much.
Bye
All
bye.
right. That was Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives.